I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. Continuing the Gospels, we just read the first chapter of Matthew, and I'm now going to look at the Joseph Smith translation for this chapter. There are quite a few changes, although most of them, there are quite a few changes, though most of them are fairly minor, just grammatical updates as is common. There is this one that I find interesting. It doesn't really change the meaning, but I think the wording is better. This is in verse 6, during the genealogy. It says, "And Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias." That's the King James. Joseph Smith changes this. "David the king begat Solomon of her whom David had taken of Urias." Notice the subtlety there. The subtle difference is that now it is saying that Bathsheba, and remember, we all know the story of Bathsheba and Uriah, but Bathsheba was not a legitimate wife of David. So when it says that had been the wife of David, is indicating that she was Urias' wife and now she's David's wife. But no, it's not that saying whom David had taken. In other words, she was not David's wife. In God's eyes, Bathsheba and David were not married. She was still the husband of Uriah. I find that an interesting change. Now there's a couple other ones here. In verse 16, Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. And we have this addition. "And Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, as the prophets have written." Now that's a common phrase that is used throughout Matthew. This is his indication. He's telling you that he is recording the fulfillment of a prophecy. The prophets have written that this would happen, and this is now it happening. Having that addition doesn't really change the meaning of it, but it gives us one more time where Matthew is giving us this indication. But the one I find interesting, in verse 17, where it says, the generations from Abraham to David are 14, and from David to Babylon are 14. Joseph Smith changes this just to were 14. So it makes it past tense instead of present tense, minor grammatical update again. But verse 18 is interesting. Because the King James says, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise, when as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together." But we have this addition, now from the Joseph Smith translation, "Now as it is written, the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise, after his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph." But there's this alternative one, because there's actually two different manuscripts for the Joseph Smith translation, and there are some minor variations in there. So it's possible that it was written here that when his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, as it is written. So the "as it is written" might be placed there. Either way, this would indicate that Matthew's not the first to write about the birth of Christ. There were other accounts of the birth of Christ written before Matthew. And he is telling us that as other people have written, this is what happened. Now, scholars do think that Mark was written first, but Mark does not have an account of the birth of Christ, which means we are missing other accounts. There are other accounts out there that we do not have, that Matthew, at least, considered genuine historical records. I find that very interesting. Now, there are a couple other minor changes here. There's the possible one where it says in verse 19, "Joseph, her husband, being a just man." There's a possibility that Joseph Smith changed it to a just one. That doesn't make any sense to me, so I don't know what's going on there. But when it says, "The angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream," in verse 20, Joseph Smith changes dream to vision. A little more clarity there. Now here's an interesting one in verse 22. King James says, "Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of of the Lord by the prophets, saying." Joseph Smith, I'm not even sure if this is a change in meaning, but definitely makes it flow better. "Now this took place, that all things might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophets." So he is no longer referencing just a specific prophecy, but he's saying, okay, now we're into the life of Christ, and all that is done was to fulfill the words of the prophets, so that not one point of those prophecies was left out. I like that. In verse 24, the King James says, "Then Joseph, being raised from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord had bidden him." Joseph Smith corrects this. "Then Joseph, awaking out of his vision." Now I find this one interesting in that it indicates that he was asleep. Or at least he was not conscious of what was going on around him. He was in a vision state. And when the vision closed, he had to, at least in a sense, wake up. He had to bring himself back to awareness of what was around him. Now, was he actually asleep when he had the vision? Or was he brought into a trance by the vision? Doesn't really clarify. Could be either one. I find it interesting. But that is the full Joseph Smith translation for this chapter. So I'm going to leave that here. And I think we are going to finish out Luke chapter 1 next. Then we'll be flipping back to 3rd Nephi. So I will see you there.